the convenience store watcher. It was a typical Saturday afternoon in Spokane, Washington, and I was enjoying a rare day off to relax. I had just gotten off work and was looking forward to spending some time in my garden, away from office responsibilities. The sun was shining, and the sound of birds singing was the perfect soundtrack for a peaceful moment. My wife, Karen, had gone out for a shopping session, and I was home alone, savoring the tranquility of the afternoon. I had planned just to take a short walk to the local convenience store, something simple to pick up some snacks for the rest of the day. As I walked down Main Street, I decided to take a shortcut through the local park, a place I always found pleasant and safe. On the way, I spotted a peculiar-looking man sitting on a bench, wearing a dark coat and a beret that seemed out of place for the season. He was alone and appeared engrossed in a thick, dirty book that was barely visible under the shade of the coat. I didn't think much of it until, as I approached, he lifted his eyes and stared at me with an unsettling intensity. Without breaking eye contact, he mumbled something I couldn't understand, and I quickened my pace, feeling a chill. When I entered the convenience store, the familiar sound of the door chime greeted me, and I was met with the cool air and the smell of fresh coffee. The store was relatively empty, except for a bored-looking employee behind the counter and an elderly woman browsing the shelves. The usual shopping experience was interrupted by a strange feeling that I was being watched, an impression I couldn't shake since the park encounter. I focused on grabbing some snacks and a six-pack of beer, trying to ignore the growing discomfort. As I wandered through the store aisles, I noticed that the same man from the park was now at the back of the store, standing near the beverage fridge. He looked at me again, but this time there was something even more disturbing in his expression. He didn't seem interested in the products, but was just keeping his eyes fixed on me in an unsettling way. My discomfort grew as I realized he was trying to maintain distance, but never losing sight of where I was. I decided to rush my purchase and leave, feeling that something was very wrong. When I got home and checked my phone, I received a strange message. It was from an unknown number, and the text read, "I saw you at the store. Don't forget what you saw." The text had no signature, and the message seemed out of context. At that moment, discomfort turned into real fear, and I rushed to lock all the doors and windows, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I wondered if I was being paranoid or if something more sinister was happening. With my heart racing, I started thinking about what might be going on. I had heard stories of people being followed or watched, but I never imagined I could be a target. I called Karen, who was still out shopping, to tell her about the strange encounter and the message. She tried to calm me down, but the worry in her voice was palpable. As we talked, I heard the sound of a car stopping outside my house. I looked out the window and saw a white van, the same color as the vehicle the man had at the store. The white van stayed parked for a few minutes, but no one got in or out. I felt a bit relieved, but also uneasy. That night, I called the police to report the incident and the message, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I spent the night restlessly, with all kinds of disturbing thoughts racing through my mind. The idea of being followed and watched was almost unbearable. The next day, Karen tried to cheer me up, and we decided to go together to the convenience store to see if the employee or security footage had any useful information. The store manager reviewed the security footage and confirmed that the peculiar man had been recorded by some of the cameras, but there was no additional information about him. It seemed he had just been visiting the store, showing no other unusual behavior apart from his unsettling presence. The feeling of helplessness in the face of the lack of concrete evidence was frustrating. That afternoon, I received a new message on my phone, this time with a photo. It was an image of me leaving the store, taken from a considerable distance. At the top of the photo were the words, "I'm close. Never forget." Fear took over again, and I knew I had to act. Karen and I decided it would be best to leave home for a while, so we spent the night at a nearby hotel, hoping it would provide some security. During our stay at the hotel, something even more disturbing happened. In the middle of the night, I heard knocking on our hotel room door. With my heart pounding, I went to the door, only to find no one there. I looked down the hallway and saw only the hotel security guard doing his rounds. However, when I returned to the room, I found a note on the nightstand that read, "I know where you are." Panic set in, and we decided to call the police urgently. The police conducted a thorough sweep of the hotel and the surrounding areas, but found no concrete evidence about the intruder. However, a week later, a coworker of mine mentioned that he had seen a man matching the description I gave wandering around our area. Although his presence was unsettling, there was no way to directly connect him to us. The feeling of being stalked faded somewhat over time, but the paranoia lingered. Now, months later, the feeling of being watched has never completely left me. Life has returned to normal, but the unease remains whenever someone watches me a little too intently or a white car parks in my neighborhood. The experience left me with a deep sense of distrust and a constant reminder that normalcy can abruptly shift into something unsettling and threatening. The fear of being watched, of being pursued, is something I will never forget. The Lonely Road. It was late on a chilly Friday night in October, and I was driving back home after a long week at the office in Seattle. As usual, I stopped at the 24-hour convenience store on the outskirts of town, right off Interstate 5. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone, or at least, that's what I thought. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a sterile glow over the aisles filled with snacks and soft drinks. I grabbed a coffee and a couple of snacks for the road, chatting briefly with the cashier about the upcoming Seahawks game. It was the kind of mundane stop that felt almost comforting after a grueling week of work. As I was about to leave, a man in his mid-40s with a disheveled appearance entered the store. His clothes looked worn and his eyes darted around nervously. He seemed out of place in the otherwise familiar setting. We exchanged glances, and he gave me a strained smile before heading toward the back of the store. Something about his demeanor unsettled me, but I shrugged it off and went on my way. It was only when I noticed his car, a beat-up sedan parked a few spaces away from mine, facing the store with its engine running, that my unease grew. I walked back to my car, trying to ignore the growing sense of discomfort. As I approached, I saw the man standing by his car, staring intently at me. He didn't move as I got closer, which made me feel even more uneasy. I hurriedly unlocked my car and got inside, watching him through the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, his eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but the way he lingered made my skin crawl. Pulling out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the man's car pull out behind me. My heart started to race as I navigated the dark road, trying to shake off the feeling of being followed. The man's headlights were now casting a long shadow behind me. I took a few random turns, hoping to lose him, but his car remained persistent, always just a few yards behind. Each turn I made seemed to be mirrored by his vehicle, heightening my anxiety. After what felt like an eternity, I pulled onto a less traveled road, hoping to break the pattern. To my relief, the car seemed to slow down and eventually stop. I took a deep breath, thinking I had finally lost him. However, as I turned around to head back to the main road, I saw his car parked in the distance, its engine off, but the headlights still on. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I realized I had no idea where this road led and if the man was still out there. I decided to turn around and head back, but as I reached the intersection where the road met the main highway, I noticed something alarming. My wallet and phone were missing from the passenger seat. Panic set in. I checked my pockets in the car, but they were nowhere to be found. The last place I had seen them was inside the store. I remembered the man from earlier had been in the store at the same time I was, and a chilling thought crossed my mind. Had he taken them? My sense of dread intensified as the road stretched on, with the forest on either side becoming denser and the streetlights fewer. The night seemed to grow darker with each passing moment, and the once familiar route now felt like a maze of shadows. My mind raced with the possibility that the man could be lurking somewhere in the darkness, waiting for me to make a mistake. The isolation of the road was almost suffocating, and the silence was only broken by the occasional rustling of leaves and my own erratic breathing. In a desperate attempt to contact someone, I tried to use the in-car phone system, but it was useless without my cell phone. As I fumbled around, I heard the unmistakable ring of a phone coming from somewhere in the back seat. I turned around in panic, but all I saw was the empty darkness of the rear compartment. The phone continued to ring intermittently, adding to the growing terror that I was not alone in the car. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road, illuminated by my headlights. It was a tall man in a dark hoodie, standing perfectly still as if waiting for me. My instincts screamed to drive away, but my curiosity and fear held me in place. The man didn't move. He simply stood there, staring directly at me. When I finally gathered the courage to drive past him, I glanced back and saw that he had vanished, as if he had never been there. In a blind panic, I floored the accelerator, determined to get back to the safety of civilization. The road ahead seemed endless, with no signs of life or other vehicles. My mind raced through every possible scenario, trying to figure out what had happened and how to escape this nightmare. The only sound was the roaring of my engine and the occasional thud of something hitting the undercarriage of the car. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think straight. Eventually, I spotted the dim lights of a small gas station in the distance. As I pulled in, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I explained the situation to the attendant, who seemed concerned but skeptical. When I mentioned the missing items, he took a deep breath and revealed that earlier that night, a similar report had come in about a man matching the description I provided. The chilling realization hit me. Someone had been stalking me, and the scenario was eerily familiar to the previous reports. I was left with more questions than answers as I drove away from the gas station, trying to piece together the night's events. The missing wallet and phone were never found, and the man who had followed me remained unidentified. The sense of being watched never fully left me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the events of that night were just the beginning of something far more sinister. Each time I drive home late at night, I can't help but glance in my rearview mirror, always wary of the shadows lurking in the darkness. The facade of normalcy. My name is Karen, and I live in a quiet suburb of Minneapolis. I've always appreciated the calm of my neighborhood, where everyone knows each other, and there's a comforting predictability to daily life. My days revolve around working from home, occasional shopping trips to the local Target, and weekend strolls with my golden retriever Max around the nearby park. Life is peaceful here, with neatly manicured lawns and friendly waves from neighbors as we go about our routines. It's the kind of place where you never expect anything out of the ordinary to happen, until something does. Last month, a new family moved into the house across the street. Their arrival was unremarkable at first, just the usual moving truck and the sight of a few boxes being carried inside. They seemed to be a standard family, a middle-aged couple with a teenage daughter. But over the following weeks, I began to notice peculiarities. They rarely interacted with the rest of us, and their house remained shrouded in heavy curtains, even during the day. The couple seemed to have an aversion to any form of neighborly contact, which I found unusual for our otherwise open community. As days passed, the behavior of the new neighbors grew increasingly strange. I would see them in their yard, often late at night, doing what looked like odd rituals with various items. Once I spotted the husband standing in the driveway at midnight, staring up at the sky with what seemed like an unsettling intensity. The daughter would sometimes be seen walking around the block repeatedly, her face always obscured by a hood. These behaviors were not necessarily threatening, but they were out of sync with the usual suburban norm. One night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by an unsettling noise coming from the neighbor's house. It sounded like a muffled thump, followed by what I could only describe as a rhythmic scratching. Max, usually a sound sleeper, was visibly agitated, growling softly and pacing around the room. The noises continued for a while, sporadically interrupted by silence, and then resumed again. My curiosity was piqued, but I chalked it up to some sort of mechanical issue, or perhaps an unusual animal, despite the growing sense of unease. The next day, I went for my usual walk with Max and decided to take a closer look at the house. I noticed something disturbing. There were small, freshly dug holes in the garden that hadn't been there before. They seemed too deliberately placed to be the work of animals. I also spotted a strange metal box half buried near the side of the house. When I tried to peek inside, I was startled by a loud crash from the interior of the house, which made me quickly retreat. The box's contents remained a mystery, but my discomfort grew with each passing day. A few days later, my friend Jessica's cat, Muffin, went missing. Muffin was an indoor cat, so her disappearance was alarming. Jessica, who lives a few streets over, was frantic and immediately suspected foul play. While helping her search, I couldn't help but wonder if the new neighbors had something to do with it. My mind raced with the thought of their strange behavior and the odd occurrences in their yard. Despite no concrete evidence, the connection seemed too strong to ignore. The atmosphere in the neighborhood became tense. More pets went missing, and there were whispers of other residents experiencing similar unsettling incidents. People began locking their doors earlier, and there was a noticeable increase in the frequency of neighborhood watch meetings. The new neighbors continued their bizarre behavior, and their house remained a dark, foreboding presence. The once friendly atmosphere had turned into one of suspicion and unease. We all felt like something was lurking just beneath the surface of our seemingly ordinary lives. One afternoon, I found a package on my doorstep with no return address. It was an unmarked cardboard box, and when I opened it, I discovered a collection of disturbing items, photographs of our neighborhood, including some taken from unusual angles and times, and a handwritten note with cryptic messages about secrets being uncovered. My heart raced as I realized that the package must have been intended for me or someone else in the neighborhood. The unsettling feeling that I was being watched intensified. That night, as I tried to ignore the package and get some sleep, I was once again disturbed by noises from the neighbor's house. This time the sounds were louder and more erratic, with what seemed like voices raised in an argument. I decided to investigate, thinking that perhaps it was a neighborly dispute. As I approached their house, hidden in the shadows, I saw a figure moving stealthily around the yard. The figure seemed to be carrying something large and wrapped in a tarp, and the sight left me paralyzed with fear. The following morning, I decided to take a chance and contact the local authorities. To my shock, they had already been alerted to similar reports and had been investigating the new neighbors for some time. They revealed that the family had a history of criminal activity and were suspected of being involved in illegal dealings. The police conducted a raid on the house, and what they found was more horrifying than I could have imagined. A hidden room with disturbing evidence, including items connected to the missing pets and the contents of the mysterious package. As the authorities cleared out the house, the new neighbors were arrested, but their departure didn't relieve the tension entirely. The community was left to deal with the aftermath of their shocking discovery. I found myself plagued by nightmares and an unshakable sense of paranoia. The reality that these seemingly ordinary people had been living among us, hiding such sinister secrets, was profoundly disturbing. The neighborhood would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood tried to return to normal, but the impact of the events lingered. The missing pets were never found, and the disturbing memories of what transpired continued to haunt me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still unanswered questions, and perhaps more secrets hidden in the shadows. The new neighbors were gone, but the fear of the unknown remained. Every creak of a floorboard or flicker of a streetlight now held a deeper, more sinister meaning, reminding me that sometimes the darkest threats are hidden behind the most ordinary facades.